the Attractions Group podcast. This is episode 77. I'm Ryan Sir, along with Don Helbig. Don, how you doing today?
Doing great. Getting ready to head out west to Texas for the American Coaster Enthusiast Winterfest event. A lot of familiar names on the list of presenters, and so really looking forward to that.
Cool. So, before we dive into our special guest today, you can find us on all your favorite podcast apps, Apple, Google, Spotify. Make sure that you hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, but we do have a video version of the podcast there. Don, what do we have going on today?
Well, our special guest, he's synonymous with the industry. Really needs no introduction. He's an IAAPA Hall of Famer, and of course, we're talking about Dennis Speigel. Dennis, how you doing?
I'm good, Don. How are you? How are you, Ryan?
Great.
Little wet here, a little cold in Cincinnati, but other than that, doing fine.
Yeah, we feel you. All right. So let's dive right into it. So most people who listen to this podcast would probably know who you are and that you're tied in with Kings Island, Kings Dominion, Coney Island, and so on. Um, why don't you talk about where you got started? Where did Dennis Speigel start in the industry and what propelled you upward?
Well, I started at Coney Island here in Cincinnati in 1959. I was in junior high school. And Coney Island, like a lot of amusement parks, there weren't any theme parks at that time, really, except Disney. They employed educators, teachers, superintendents, principals. They all worked at amusement parks around the country. And my family was a very good friend with the superintendent of my high school, and he was the head of the admissions program at Coney Island at the Auto Gate, and he needed some help during the summer to facilitate and expedite and get people in. So he hired me to help hand out tickets on Procter & Gamble Day and Kroger Day and Dayton Day and all of these days that went on. And I worked there with him from 1959 through junior high, high school, and through college to 1969 when I was hired full-time by the Coney Island staff. They saw me every day when they came in, stood there in a shirt and tie and wingtip shoes, and kind of made a first impression. That's the way we dressed at the front gate, the auto gate at Coney Island, and happened to be at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, Dennis, I have fond memories of Coney Island, from my childhood. My childhood memories, there's not many of them that don't have Coney Island in it. But that park had an acknowledged reputation as one of the finest amusement parks in the country. Talk a little bit about what the park had to offer. What was so special about it?
Well, it was America's finest amusement park and judged as such by the industry. And of course, the great story that I like to tell is that it was one of the handful of parks that Walt Disney befriended, came to get ideas for Disneyland when he was planning it. So he became great friends with the Schott and Wachs family. Ed Schott, Ralph Wachs, Gary Wachs, Jimmy Wachs, all of them. And it was, he came here many times to see the park and would sit literally in the park on the bench and study people, rides, attractions, and got a lot of ideas from it. In fact, you probably saw, Don, at one point in time, we used to have a check hanging in the Caprice, the suite at Kings Island, from Walt Disney to Ed Schott for $1 for his services and advice on Disney.
Oh, yeah.
Never cashed. So, and the great thing about that check, it was check number one. Check number one. So that was certainly part of it. But we were a beautiful park. We were lucky. We had a wonderful piece of dirt. We were on the river. We had the river boats that came up and down and delivered people through the years, going way back to the early Island Queen and then to the Delta Queens. So it just was a great park and people loved it. And we're seeing that today as the park has been announced it's going to close and people are out front picketing. Probably today. They were this weekend when I drove by, trying to still keep it open. So it was a great park.
Yeah, again, like I said, lots of memories there. One of my memories is a regret, the Shooting Star. The last day Coney Island was open in 1971. It was September 6th. I go through the line, give my little tickets, you had to dump those in and stuff to ride, sit down in the car with my sister. The train behind it made like that loud noise going through the helix before it came back into the station. That freaked me out, so I got out of the train, never rode it. It would have been my first roller coaster ride.
Oh,
That's my biggest regret ever, is that I never rode that. So Dennis, tell me what I missed.
well, Shooting Star was a great coaster. It was a dog leg left, 96 feet high. Went out, dropped down about. I think the dip on that one was about 53 or so degrees, and went out, made the turn, came back in, and on its way in, after it hit the whoop-de-doos, it would come into before it go in the station, it would go through a tunnel. And you were screaming on the way out, you were screaming on the way back. And when you hit that tunnel, it was well placed because you hit the tunnel and then you came in, made your turn back right into the station. So everybody was screaming and hollering when they came in on the train. And of course, if you were standing in the queue line, you're going, oh my God, I can't wait. I'm going to do the same thing. What I used to do the last 2 years of the park, I was really fortunate. I was assistant manager of the park and find all kinds of different things to do and have fun in the park. And one of the things I do is walk up to the top of the Shooting Star. I'd stand at that turn, and when people would come up on the train, they would come up, and as they made the dog leg left, you kind of came up and went down like this a little bit. I'd be standing there. I'd say, "Have a great ride." I'd scare the hell out of them, and they were gone. They didn't know what they had just run into. So, but it was a great coaster, and really, had it not been for the Shooting Star, there wouldn't be a Racer or a Beast, or a Great American Scream Machine, and I can go on and name about 400 or 500 coasters. But the Shooting Star was the primer for all those coasters that came after, starting with the Racer.
All right. Like I said, I was mesmerized by it, but just, couldn't bring myself to do it at that age.
Missed a great ride. It was fun. You kind of went down the first dip and you couldn't see the track there when you went down.
Yeah.
So Dennis, most people listening to this podcast know the story of how Kings Island's inception was a result of Coney Island, due to space constraints and flooding and a myriad of other reasons, moved up 71 to the small town of Kings Mills, Ohio. But very few people actually were there as part of the process. Can you tell me from your perspective the story of when they made the decision to move and what the logistics were of moving after the 1971 season?
Yeah, well, let me start a few years before that, Ryan. We were landlocked on Coney Island. We had River Downs Race Course to the east of us. We had the community of California, Ohio, to the west of us. We had the river on the south and Route 52 on the north. So we had 155 acres, which incidentally is what Walt Disney started out with in Disneyland in California. Everybody thinks that was 1,000 acres and everything. It was 155 acres. And we were we were having floods almost every year back then. It was different weather patterns and times, and it was very costly. And young man Gary Walks, who you should have on your podcast at sometimes, he was son of Ralph Walks, nephew of Ed Schott. He saw, he was in the business, he wanted to stay in the business, and he saw the industry developing. So he started planting the seeds, if you will, for a new park to move somewhere, find a place to go. It was early in the industry. There were only at that point in time, when we were moving and getting late in the 60s, there were only two Six Flags parks. Excuse me. There was Texas opened in 61 and Georgia in 67. And the board of directors just didn't move on that issue until Fess Parker, who we know as Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone, and he had worked with Walt Disney. He saw the opportunity to come across the river, directly across the river over to Boone County, and build a park. So Gary Walks had been preaching and selling and knocking on the doors of the board members with no response at this point. And when Fess Parker came in and he announced what he was going to do, Gary went to Charles Sawyer, who was one of the larger stockholders in the deal and had never really moved positively on this, and said, "Hey, look, if we don't do something here, he's coming in across the river. We've seen what he can do, and he worked with Disney. We're going to be out of business." And boy, I'll tell you, things started flying and moving. It was crazy, and that's how Kings Island really got its momentum and started the planning. I mean, we didn't even have a name for the park. In fact, if you can see over my shoulder here, that's one of the 3 original groundbreaking shovels of Kings Island, and it says on it, "New park groundbreaking in 1970." We didn't even have a name at the time. So the first started flying, and we moved very quickly.
Well, Dennis, how hard was that, though? I mean, everybody absolutely loved Coney Island. So how hard was that for the people working there to take what was, just so much a part of people's lives and uprooting it and moving it north to Mason?
Well, if we probably knew now what we knew then, or knew then what we know now, we probably would have thrown our hands up and not have done it, because everything was empirical. We went from 155 acres to over 1,500 acres. We went from about 700 employees to almost 5,000 employees. We went from a small parking lot to 110 acres of parking lot. We went from $5 million, $6 million of annual revenue to $35 million. So everything, there wasn't even a graph. It just, everything went straight up from an operating standpoint. When we made that decision to go, when Gary Walks and the board, and I was just a kid, I was only 23. When that was planned, we were just working our butts off, making it happen, doing the planning, fighting for the racing coaster. At that point in time, I wanted to tell you that when we were talking about coasters, guys, coasters were considered passe and low class. Six Flags didn't have any, Disney didn't have any, but we knew here in Cincinnati the legacy of the Star. And I mean, we literally fought tooth and nail to get the racer coaster in the park, which is another great story, but I won't go into all of that right now. But that created the resurgence, as I said earlier, of the roller coaster. So we were working internally. We weren't getting a lot of pushback, Don, Ryan, from the marketplace at that point in time. I don't think people really knew or understood, because there wasn't a theme park like there is now within 250 or 2 hours of every major SMSA. So the interesting thing is, Ed McHale, who was the park manager and I was his assistant, we were responsible for moving Coney Island to Kings Island. What we did was Gary Walks took the baby. There were 16 of us full time, and he split the baby in half, took half the team up to Mason and kept half down at Coney. We had the operating and the construction team, and we had to do that because we had to keep generating money and we had to get the park underway. So we literally, Ed and I put together a plan, and we moved the entire park of what we wanted to move, from the sky ride to the knives and forks and spoons and spider and cuddle up and everything. 30 days we had all that up at Kings Island. So it was a big undertaking, and but it all went well. It was very smooth, and we opened on time.
Now, Dennis, after a few years at Kings Island, after it opened, you move on to start Kings Dominion. So what did you take from the construction of Kings Island, and maybe thinking if we had to do it again, we would have done this? How did you take those learnings and incorporate it at Kings Dominion?
Well, from my personal and professional standpoint, I was at Kings Island an assistant park manager then, or general manager, can't remember my title, from for 72 and 73. Okay. And I was still operating. At the latter part of 73, Gary Walk said, I want you to come down. Gary had moved and taken the team again, part of the team, Jim Figley, Roy Rector, the guys, Charlie Flatt, the guys who had developed the park, Kings Island, took them down to Virginia. And he said, I want you to start coming down and get ready because you're going to be the general manager of this park. So I was 3 days at Kings Island, 1 day on an airplane, and 3 days at Kings Dominion that whole year. I didn't get a day off in 1973, but that was okay. I could do that back then. And we were drawing on all the knowledge we had learned at Kings Island. But quite frankly, when we got to Kings Dominion, part of that team, and when the design had started, and it was too late when I got there to change it, but we made some errors. That park, Kings Dominion, should have been shifted on its axis, its front gate, and it should have gone more to the southeast than it did. And on International Street, Kings Island, we built the same buildings, had the same esplanade and the Eiffel Tower, but we didn't have the cut-throughs to Hanna-Barbera land, and we didn't have the cut-throughs over to the north side of the park at Kings Island, which was the German Fest and Lion Country Safari. So we didn't have that circulation this way through the park that we at Kings Dominion that we had at Kings Island. And when I opened the park, I realized that all we had was a pipe stem, and people would come in and they'd go into the park and they wouldn't come back up to the International Street till about 4 o'clock. So we had a huge wasting asset there, which later I was able to get the board of directors to give me some money to do rides and push out the sides of those streets a little bit as far as we could. We didn't have much room, really, because of the way the parks are designed. But so we had a lot of good things we learned, the coasters and the development and the technology, but we missed a few things on the design. So the way it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. So, Dennis, a part of King's Dominion's storied history involves a filming of a movie called Roller Coaster. I've heard I know somebody that I'm on Skype with right now that made a cameo in it. Tell us about that.
Hey, cameo, I had a starring role. What are you talking about?
I want to redact my statement. You were a star.
So how that came about, Universal Studios called me, and they said, look, we're going to be making a movie about amusement parks, and we'd like to utilize King's Dominion. We're going to utilize the park down in Norfolk that was being torn down, and we're going to be using Magic Mountain out in California. And I said, well, tell me, and we'd like KD. And I said, well, tell me about the script and everything. So they said, well, there's a person who extorts money from the parks by going through them, and if they don't give them the money, this is the cliff note, we blow up your roller coaster and hurt people. And I said, no, that's not a very good story. We don't like that story too much. This is not going to be well received. And they said, essentially, after going, I'm working with Sid Sheinbaum and Lou Wasserman and some of the directors. I mean, that's the chairman and president of Universal Studios. And they had done Poseidon Adventure, they'd done the Towering Inferno, they had done Earthquake. And they said, well, we're going to do it whether you do it or help us or not. I said, well, let me do this. Send me the script and let me read the script. And so I read the script, and they've got transient, drunken bums running the rides, old, worn out people. And I said, that's not our industry. We have young, great students and kids. So I said, if you let me edit the script with your team and give you the information that really is here, I said, I think maybe we could work with you. So They sent it to me. I did it. We went out. I went out and met with them in California, and I negotiated a deal with them, and they paid us $250,000 to. I don't even know if anybody knows that, to rent King's Dominion for 6, 8 weeks, however long they were there, and that was a lot of money in those days. And they also allowed the script edits to go in the right way. So if you look at the movie, they didn't they didn't take out the extortionist Tim Bottoms, but so they came in and they said, I met everybody. George Speigel became a great friend, and Richard Woodmark and Clayburgh, all of them, Helen Hunt, they were all they were all there, and they kept saying, we need somebody to play the general manager, and we'd like you to play the general manager of the park. I said, I don't have time. Thanks very much, but I don't have time. So they were going to hire a short, little fatter than I was, worn out weatherman in Richmond. And I said, they told me that. I said, no, you're not going to have him running King's Dominion. And they said, well, we want you. I said, well, what are the lines? And they said, well, one of them is, would somebody please tell me what's going on around here? I said, hell, I say that 25 to 30 times a day. And this is true. That is exactly what I told the director. And so they brought me in. I actually had 6 speaking lines. I have received royalty checks on that movie up until 2 years ago, from anything from $2 to $2,500. I'd never know. I'd get the envelope and it'd be a kind of a surprise. I didn't know I was being paid for it, and I didn't know it back then, incidentally. But to be immortalized on celluloid, that's fabulous, and you can't take that away. So became good friends with those people. I have to tell you one quick story. George Speigel would come in my office at night, and he'd have a drink with me after we were closing. And he played the banjo, and he had just recorded a album called The Yama Yama Man, and so we really became friends. And so I'm out. The movies, the team leaves. They were there those 6, 8 weeks, whatever it was. I don't see anybody. I hear back and forth from the producers and the executive director, and I'm out in California. I'm going to Hanna-Barbera because I was the liaison between the parks and the studios out there. And I'm pulling the Beverly Hills Hotel, and I go downstairs in the apothecary to get me some chapstick and Alka-Seltzer. And here's George Speigel standing at the counter. I see him. He doesn't see me. So, and I haven't talked to him maybe only twice in a year now. And I bump into him, and he goes, excuse me. So I bump into him again. I give him a good elbow, and he goes, excuse me. And he turns and he looks and he goes, Denny, what the hell are you doing here? And I said, hey, if I'm going to make my debut in a major motion picture with you, I want to make sure I'm not on the cutting room floor. And I came out to check it out, which was all bull. And we went upstairs and had a drink, and the rest is history. Came out. That was the second most expensive movie ever made at that time. His first movie in cents around.
Yeah, I've watched it many times, and one of the things that caught my eye the first time I watched that movie when it came out in 1977 was the singing mushrooms. So talk about them a little bit. How did those come about? And did you expect them when you were at King's Dominion? Did you ever think they'd be so iconic?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. Obviously, at that time, early stages of our industry. Now we're back in the middle 70s, okay? Animation, we couldn't afford the Disney animation, but animation was big and people wanted it. So I set up a company within the King's Dominion company, and we called it Denny's Dilemma. And I brought in 2 very talented people who worked for King's Dominion. This was all under the King's Dominion banner. And we started making animation. And we had the mushrooms, hello to Yogi, hello to Scooby, hello to do. And then we had a big bear who was down at our train ride, who set up on the water tank, and he talked to the people in the queue line. and then we had a few more yogis and things in the cave and some places. So I was really trying to create our own in-house animation company, and that was a tough period in our company, and we had to watch expenses, so it kind of fell by the wayside. But uh, you know, after all these years, Pat Jones, the general manager of King's Dominion, 4 or 5 years ago, they brought back the mushrooms and have them singing the song again. So yeah, it's still pretty cute, and uh, that's what it was all about: trying new things and getting things that people couldn't see uh, other places in the parks that entertained them.
It was certainly identifiable to King's Dominion. I mean, I can't think about King's Dominion without the singing mushrooms.
Mushrooms, yeah.
Right. So, Dennis, after leaving King's Dominion, you started your own company, International Theme Park Services Incorporated, better known as ITPS. Tell us about your company and what you do.
Well, actually, they shuffled the deck in 1980, and they moved people around, and they started they started moving the GMs, and I was brought back to corporate, and I was part of the my title, I think, was vice president of operations of the parks. I wasn't being used properly in that role, and the new guy was Nelson Schwab at that time, and he really had no park experience. He had come out of, he was building condos and developments down in the southeast, and I did that role for about a year, and at that time, that's about when Disney and Tokyo started developing and building. It was such a success over in with the Oriental Land Company. Well, people started coming to Taft and wanting help. They were consulting and investing and advising and anything they could. Well, at that point in time, the broadcasting was still the big part of the company. It wasn't the parks at that time. And so I would take these projects in to Nelson and Dudley and all of them and say, hey, we got an opportunity here. They'll pay us $250,000, 300,000. Well, to that was kind of crumbs on the table, and I don't mean that negatively. It was just small potatoes at that point in time to the company. But if you took those and brushed them on the floor to the mouse on the floor, that became a banquet. Well, I was the mouse on the floor. I was kind of tired of not being utilized properly, and I went in and said, hey, I'm gonna either play me or trade me, and I left and under good auspices with Taft and Dudley. I did the I helped put together the Australia's Wonderland, and Dudley Taft said, would you go down and finish that deal? And I said, absolutely. I went down to Australia and finished and got that kind of ready and positioned. Keith James came down later and some other people. But I started ITPS. There was a company that had come to Taft who was one of those that wanted assistance, and they weren't really giving the assistance. And they said, really what we like is you. Will you come to work for us? And I said, well, I'm going to be doing something. So that was my stepping stone. It was a project called Wonder World, which actually never happened, but they worked on it very hard, had great ideas, very talented team over there. And I was going back and forth all the time to England. And that was my first project. And then all this other work starts coming in because people are looking for assistance. So after a couple of years, they're still working on their project. I said, look, guys, I can't come to work for you full time. I've got too much on my plate now. But I'll continue to help you. And I worked with them for another 3 or 4 years. Their funds were starting to dwindle. And I said, don't worry about paying me or paying my company. You were there when I needed a stepping stone. I'm going to be here with you until their project went away. And we hit the ground running. And today we're over 500 projects in 55 countries and have built and planned and operated and worked on some of the biggest and most successful projects in the world, really.
Yeah, it's great. And if you have not subscribed to the newsletter, the ITPS newsletter, highly recommended. It's like one-stop shopping every day when you open up your email. Dennis, let's jump forward now to 2023, the season we just had. What were some of the things that maybe, surprised you? Maybe some things that, you weren't expecting from 2023?
Well, the world changed, as you know, Don, Ryan. I mean, in 2020, our legs were cut off with COVID, and there was very little good that came out of that one thing, which I'll talk about in a minute. But uh, we went from an industry that really had been fine tuned and was working very well. It's a pretty good mechanism now. This is all the parks: Disney, Universal, SeaWorld, Six Flags. Everybody is doing pretty well um, to a degree. And then we were shut down. So we went from what I call, we all use zero base budgeting in our businesses, but I said we went to zero base planning because we had to throw out all the old playbooks. It's like having a football team and your playbooks. Throw them out. Let's start again. And the what surprised me the most, I think, is how we adjusted, how rapidly we adjusted, and how we succeeded with those adjustments. I mean, Cedar Fair, Six Flags, all of the companies, Disney, everybody, purging people, purging different marketing approaches, different capital approaches, stopping projects, continuing planning while we don't have any money. I mean, nobody knew where this industry was going at that point in time. Disinfecting, sanitizing, sterilizing everything, and moving people, losing our capacities and things like that. But we came through that. When we came back in 21, I could see we have here at ITPS, we've always been lucky. We were able to read the tea leaves, and we saw the smoke and the fire coming, and we knew that 2021 was going to be a hell of a bounce back season. And I was telling the investment community, who I speak with a lot, in the media, that it looks like this pin-up demand is going to be the roaring 20s of today. And it was. I mean, they came back in droves. Unfortunately, what happened was we couldn't handle them. We could not handle the people because we had to cut back our operations, people, and all of these different plans that we had to put in. But the one thing, Don, that came out of 2020 and carried through into 23 and will into 24 is the per capita spends. It forced the parks, everybody from the destinations to the regionals, to look at and accelerate their touchless, cashless payment systems. So per capitas in 2021 rose between 11 and 36%. And that carried forward into 22 until we started seeing a little bit of the economic downturn. Attendance was falling faster than per caps, and per caps have still hung in there. So what was happening? People now were kind of buying in the theme parks, I said, the way we shop online. We go into eBay or Amazon and say, and while I'm in here, I'm going to buy this, this, and this. Well, they'd say, give me a churro and a burro and a candy apple and a Coke and a hot dog. So those sales went up dramatically. Had it not been for that, because the attendance was off, you would have seen different results in all the companies, and you would have seen some disaster really out there. But those per cap, being forced to do that the way we did and implementing that really helped. So 23, no, other than that, really no great surprises. I mean, uh, oil prices at the gas pumps were high this last season. Typically, that pulls our attendance back, as it did in 2007. It was like when the gas hit $4 a gallon in 2007, it was like people were hitting the head with a ball bat. They just stopped. Every time it went up a quarter, they stopped. We didn't see that, fortunately, in 2023. So it's kind of carried through. But we are, we're watching the economy. This is going to be a crazy year coming up because of the election. People are very cautious. Everybody I talk to in the industry is wondering what impact all this craziness in Washington, what we see every day on the news, is going to have on us. And it has in the past. So we look at those kind of things. But we're a very I always said we're not a recession proof industry, but we're very resilient. We're recession resilient. What we do is we bounce back faster than hotels and airlines and movie theaters and things like that. And you guys probably know roughly 375 million people go to theme parks a year, more than the population. So they don't stop coming. They adjust their spendings and things like that.
And Dennis, you made a couple of interesting points about, we're living in this post-COVID world where 2020 was very unique for a lot of reasons, and then 2021 was a bounce back. I feel like we kind of had revenge travel and stuff like that for the next couple of years. Here we are, about 4 years later. What do you think that 2024 is going to look like for the industry?
Well, there are a couple of things we have to manage, Ryan, very carefully, and it starts with the pricing, both at the front gate and internally. We hit the pricing wall about every 9 to 10 years, and if you go back and look at this, and we've been in business 40 years, so we've watched it happen. We finally we priced it. Now people say, wait a minute, that's enough. And you start to see that pullback in attendance. And I might say that's right where we were in 2019 fourth quarter. And you guys might remember this from Kings Island because we were watching the Cedar and the Six and Disney. The season passes were not hitting their anticipated projections going into that fourth quarter when we sell them at Christmas, Halloween, Christmas. And I said, okay, guys, here it is. It's right on schedule. Well, the satellite went out of control with COVID, so we didn't get to see that. And of course, 21 came back. But I really think that those two issues, Ryan, your question, internal and admission pricing have to really be watched very carefully. I believe we've just about outlived the pay one price concept. It's been with us since 1961. It's been great. For that, we were strip tickets, nickel ticket, or just an admission, general admission. And if you look at Disney, you will see how well they've done with their dynamic pricing. And their numbers have been really good the last few years. And it's been really due to that dynamic pricing and managing and implementing that properly. And our business, particularly in the regional parks, but destinations too, has always been a market up, market down business. So we discount. There was a time, Don, when you could find a discount on a McDonald's tray, a Coca-Cola, a Pepsi, a Burger King, a Kroger bag. I mean, anywhere you looked, a Publix, Lucky's, you could find it on the bottom of your shoe, and you took it to the window. Well, that's changed with social media and the way we market our parks now. But still, a true, transparent, dynamic pricing program helps fill the voids, and it helps control the crowds. And if you do it right, like Disney has, when they're packed at Christmas and New Year's, right, and they close the gates, they've increased the prices, but that's cut back on the attendance. So it gives the guest a better experience, gives them more money. And you got two type of people come to your parks on dynamic pricing: time sensitive and price sensitive. The time sensitive guy, he's like me. If I have to go to Hong Kong, I got to get on a plane. If I have to pay $10,000 and be there in 2 days, I have to do it. Although I charge it to the client. Okay. if it's the price sensitive guy, he says, hey, honey, see if you can find a ticket to Kings Island or Kings Dominion in April. And she goes online with the true dynamic pricing. She says, yeah, there's a 40% discount there on a Tuesday. Let's go then. Yeah, let's tell the family. So you just have to manage that, implement it. And if you asked 100 people on the street about dynamic pricing, they wouldn't know the term, but they use it in airlines, car rentals, parking meters. It goes on and on.
Yeah.
Dennis, one of the other challenges over the last couple of years Do you see it continuing with staffing issues?
Keep dumping that one. Iced tea in my face. Sorry. Um, the one thing that disappoints me the most about our industry is the labor situation's been with us for years, and we really haven't managed that properly. COVID accelerated that, and it is here to stay because a lot of reasons. There's a lot of competition. Our seasons have been compressed. Schools get out later, they go back earlier. So those peak periods of June, July, August, which used to be like this, now they go up here, and your weeks are compressed. So you've got parks like Six Flags Over Georgia that close daily during the first week in August because they can't get employees. Not only does it hurt you on the employee side, it hurts you on the family visitation side because they can't travel like they did. So it's changed, and we need to do something about that. And from the labor standpoint, labor has always been our single biggest cost of our operating budgets. And it typically is about 50% Today, that's over 63% in a lot of parks and rising. I mean, you had Cedar Point paying $25 an hour to high school and college students. Kings Island was in that high range. Six Flags was doing the same. And yeah, we just have to find new ways, Don, to mine the ore, which are those people, because as I said earlier, it takes 5, 6, 7,000 people to run a park like Kings Island or Kings Dominion or Six Flags Over Texas. And times are different. When we opened Kings Island, I love to tell the story. Personnel was lined up from front door personnel all the way through the parking lot out to Kings Island Drive. And we hired one person for every 10 we interviewed. That's changed. That's not the case anymore at any park. You don't have that kind of market. So we have to address that.
Yeah, I can remember my early years working at Kings Island, 2007, 8, 9, that we would have those big crowds come out when they'd have the job fairs, and that would go from where the pest house is outside the front gate with the line. But you're right. I mean, times have certainly changed, and it's a struggle for everybody now.
Every park. And Disney, we were doing something with them this last year and a half. And at any time we were working with, they could have hired 30% more people, they said. 30% more.
Yeah. That's not a few people. Dennis, I know that probably nobody's ever asked you about this before, but Cedar Fair and Six Flags announced a merger. And I do remember you had a video embedded in your newsletter and you talked about how it'll bring down costs. I think you specifically used the example of like even straws will be cheaper, which is absolutely true. But let's take a slightly different perspective. Uh, Kind of go through very, very briefly the pros of this and what you think might be some cons of it.
Well, we're a mature industry, and everybody who is in it should understand that, and everybody who's coming into it should understand that. And mature industries go through roll-ups and mergers just like we have. I was saying to you guys earlier that we have here at ITPS, we've done about $700 million in M&A space, over 45 parks bought and sold. So I've seen this process for over 15 years, and it can be a good process. And I believe that and I've been very candid on this topic, that Cedar Fair is the wind beneath the wings of Six Flags. Six Flags has been a ship at sail for the last 8, 9 years, maybe more, without a captain, just floating all over. And it's certainly progressively gotten worse. Mike Spanos, who came in and was literally hired right on the doorstep of COVID and left right before it was out. COVID was going away. He didn't get any traction, wasn't able to do anything with Six Flags, and the ship just went like this and all over. Then the new CEO, Salim Basul, came in and really has no knowledge of the industry. I mean, he's made pronouncements about Six Flags when he came in, that just didn't make any sense, quite frankly and honestly, if people are being honest. And um, so I think Cedar coming in, and one good thing about Richard Zimmerman is Richard is a guy who gets it on both sides of the ledger. He came out of Paramount. I've known Richard for years. He gets the number side wonderfully, excellently, and he had the opportunity to sit in the GM chairs and operate the park. So he gets the operating side. So what do you get there? You get a good mesh of a CEO who understands the business, and it's not just out of balance one way or the other. So when you look at the operating efficiencies, the Six Flags company has been severely hindered the last 16, 18 months. And they've lost a lot of key personnel. They lost their presidents. They lost their corporate people. And they lost people down in the parks at the maintenance and safety and retail and those areas, which we just can't afford to lose in our industry. They're hard to find, hard to train. But the good part of it, Ryan, to answer your question, is you do get the efficiencies. And I've seen this. I've been part of this doing the due diligence on some companies where you've got the soft side, which are the straws and the cups and the hamburger and the light bulbs and all that kind of stuff that makes parks operate from a daily basis. You get that leverage because if you do it right and you have a good central buying or regional buying, you will save money. You will save millions of dollars. On the other side of the ledger, the hard side, I call it, is the rides and attractions. So there was when Six Flags did their roll up back in the 90s, and they overpaid too much. Kieran Burke and Gary Story, those guys, they overpaid for their parks. They were paying 11 times multiples, and it was driving Six Flags down into the ground. They had to do all these cutbacks. They couldn't get the efficiencies of that. That if it was well managed, you could see a Six Flags and a Cedar getting today. And that really impacted Six Flags when they couldn't get those efficiencies. They had to cut back hours and days and operations within the park. So if I can sit down now with Premier Rides or Vekoma or Intamin or B&M or whomever, and I say, look, guys, we don't want to put you out of business. We want you to make money because we need you. You're important to our industry. You're our life's blood. You're the attractions that we put the people on. I want to buy 10 of these over the next 3 years. Give me a good price, and let's do it. And you're going to save a lot of money that way. And it also, Ryan, it not only is on the purchase price, but it's on the maintenance and the ongoing, because there are other aspects of that trickle down through the operating budgets that will work in their effect. So is it going to be an easy task? No. Of this merger, there's a lot that is going to have to be worked on and managed. But eventually, I think it's going to take a couple of years, but I think it'll be a harmonious relationship.
Now, Dennis, is part of this merger plan, Six Flags and Cedar Fair, the DOJ, has come in and they're going to have to do like a second request for information. Kind of walk our listeners through what that really means.
Well, I've been involved with, as I said earlier, with deals where that's happened. Nothing quite this large, because this will be the largest merger in our industry's history. We're bringing together a package that'll end up being somewhere around 42 parks. Right now, the Department of Justice, DOJ, is they're looking at mergers and acquisitions a little more differently and a little more in depth than they have over the last 10 or so years. Good example, Don, is right here in Cincinnati. Kroger, the largest grocer, is buying Albertsons, and that's a huge, and thousands of operations. And one of them, I think it was Albertsons, said they already have to close 430 grocery stores to not compete. But if you look at Six and Cedar, you got 42 parks. that have been there in existence, and they really have never competed that heavily with one another. As we built the industry and we built the market, if you look at the United States, there's a major theme park within 2.5 hour drive of every SMSA, every major SMSA. There's a little bit of overlap of those circles because we do concentric population circles of 50, 100, 150, 200, and beyond the travel market. But you got a little bit out in California with Magic Mountain and Knott's Berry Farm. Got a little over on the East Coast, maybe with Carowinds and Six Flags over Georgia. Maybe a little bit down in the Southwest with Six Flags down there. But really, and Slitterbahn. But other than that, no, I don't think that's going to be an obstacle. Something they'll look at. They have to. That's something that would tear up the deal. I don't think so.
So, Dennis, one of the things that a lot of people seem to be concerned with on both sides of this deal, and I'm talking about from a guest standpoint, is they're worried that their local Cedar Fair park is going to start looking like Six Flags parks, or Six Flags parks are going to look like Cedar Fair parks, and they're not going to retain their identities. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that each park will have its own identity? Is that important from a business standpoint, or do you think that ultimately the streamline will cause the parks to have a lot more repetition as far as what the park looks and feels like?
Well, I look at that more as branding, Ryan. And I'll give you an example. And Don, you were back there at this time when Paramount bought Kings. They came in, they put that Paramount sign on the King sign out front, and there was hell to pay. People in the marketplace, they were upset. I mean, I think they were picketing out there.
And nobody was happy.
This is our park. This is not a thing. It's Kings Island. Blah blah blah. So I think a lot was learned back then. I think Zimmerman gets that, I'm sure. Now, if you take the two companies and you're honest, Six Flags has a better national branding than Cedar Fair because Cedar Fair was never really under one umbrella like Six Flags. I'll tell you what I told the media when they called me when Disney bought Marvel, and they're living it right now with Spider-Man, if you're following the news. They said, what do you think they're going to do with Spider-Man? I said, well, what do you think they're going to do? Put him in a closet and put him on a shelf and just keep it in the library? I said, they're going to use him. And there's going to be a time that this thing ages out and you're going to see Spider-Man go into Disney. Well, that happened. I said, you may not see it in Florida or California right away. Well, it was Hong Kong and Japan and the other places. And the same thing is going to happen with Six Flags. You're not going to see well, the stock I think is going to be under the six acronym. I don't think you're going to see the six go up on parks that all the parks. I don't know where it will, where it won't, but I think it'll be very judicious in their planning how they do that. But eventually, I think that could be a very good thing for the company. That once they get Six Flags healthy again, get that brand up and bring it to the people and make them happy, I think that can be a very good thing. So it'll happen at some point in time, but not right away.
Yeah, Dennis, kind of along the lines of what you're saying between the two, with Cedar Fair, you've got the Peanuts. With Six Flags, you've got the DC characters, you got the Looney Tunes. Can they all live in the same world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at Disney, what they've done. The biggest mistake Disney ever made in the last 20 years, in my opinion, is they opted out of the Harry Potter auction and they let Universal buy it. And when Universal bought Harry Potter and bought it in with their other Nickelodeon and all their other things that they were doing, the what's the family, the crazy family, they're all blue and yellow and everything. You know what I mean? Marge and Homer.
The Simpsons.
Simpsons. Yeah. I mean, they blended that in. Well, people are looking for this new IP. And yeah, they can absolutely live together. And smart management team will figure out how to use that demographically properly and put it in the product line. And I think it gives them an atomic bomb to work with. That we went through a feeding frenzy in the industry here as it related to IPs about 10 years ago. And companies were buying up everything. Well, everything was pretty well bought up back then. So to get some of these more popular things that we know work and people love tested time, yeah, I think it's going to work and be very, very good. I think it's a great deal.
Awesome. Cool. So, Dennis, I really appreciate you being on the show. Uh, Obviously, like, there's a lot of people in the industry, but there's also a lot of enthusiasts that listen to the show. So, why don't you give us your website? And, we already plugged your newsletter. Tell us where you can, where you can get onto that.
Well, we're happy. First of all, thank you for having me on. It's my pleasure. Don, you and I have been friends for years and always supported you, and you've supported me. And Ryan, I know you, and we just met here recently, but thanks for including me. Uh, our newsletter, we've been doing it now 26 years. It's free, goes out every day. It covers theme parks, amusement parks, water parks, family entertainment centers, museums, uh, zoos, aquariums, LBEs, location-based entertainment, goes all the way down. So you can find something you like in there and you click on it, you read the story. And I have to tell you, every year at IAAPA, from Iger to whoever I see down there or run into, they say, hey, Spiegel, the first thing we do in the morning is we get our cup of coffee and go to the computer and turn on and see what's happening in the industry. We read your newsletter. So that's a good testament. So they can contact Sean Haas at enterthemepark.com, SHAWNHAAS at enter themepark.com, and you can become a subscriber. And again, there's no cost to that, and we're happy to do it. And our general website, Ryan, is www.enterthemepark.com, and you can go online and you can see who we are and what we do. Um, we've really covered the globe. Um, Things aren't as busy today in the industry for all of us as it was back in the 80s and 90s, but we're still busy. Uh, but again, we're a mature industry here, and we're becoming a mature industry in the um, around the globe now. And I would say to you guys, the one thing I think you really ought to take a look at for some of your future podcasts is uh, the technological advancements that are coming on. I don't know if you know Lanny Smoot, but Lanny just came out with this new holo tile where you literally stand on the floor and you can move in any direction, as many people as you want, and you go nowhere. They'll be using this in movies. They'll be using this on rides. They'll be using this on Broadway. They'll be using this. I mean, this is so incredible. I watched it 4 times this week, and things like that are coming along that we couldn't even conceive of, just not even 5 years ago, a year or two ago. So you ought to be looking at all those great technological advancements that are coming, which are what we want to see happen and buy, because that's what brings the people in. That's what they come for.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well,
Yeah, well, Dennis, really appreciate your time, talking with us here on the Attractions Group podcast. And, like I said, you and I go way back, and I've always enjoyed, hearing you talk about the industry, where it's been, where it's going. And most of the time you've been spot on.
Well, just keep in mind what I tell everybody. We're not here for a long time. We're here for a good time.
yep, that's why you got to work in the industry. Well, thanks again, Dennis. Thank you to all the listeners for listening to the Attractions Group podcast. Make sure that you follow us in all your favorite podcast apps. Watch the YouTube video, hit that subscribe button, hit like, and I'll put a link in the description to your website so they can kind of check out ITPS and what you do. Because especially if people listening to this want to get involved in the industry, you guys are really a fantastic resource for that. So thank you again for being on the show, Dennis.
Thanks, guys. Good to be with you.
Thank you.